InterNews is an international nonprofit organization focusing on independent media development and access to information. InterNews has been running a News That Moves campaign to provide critical information to refugees traveling the Balkan route and held up in camps. Alison Campbell is the InterNews Senior Director for Global Initiatives, heading humanitarian response efforts. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Alison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little, just really briefly, tell us about InterNews. It's been something that's been going on for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
InterNews has been around for a little over 30 years. We're a media development organization, which essentially means that we work very closely with local independent media in the countries where we work, generally countries that are experiencing transition, democratic transition, elections, conflict, and those kinds of issues. Our work is in 4 areas: to ensure access to information, as you mentioned, to ensure that traditionally excluded and marginalized groups, women, LGBT, disabled, ethnic groups in certain countries, have access to media and also have access to the channels to make their voices heard in their societies. And we also work to ensure that people have the tools they need or the skills they need to engage with the information that they're receiving. That's a lot of work around data literacy and media literacy.
Now, coming from that is your new campaign, News That Moves. Tell us what that's all about.
Our belief is that information is a form of aid in its own right. So when most people think about crisis, they think about providing food, water, shelter. InterNews understands very well that actually what people need, particularly in the opening days in the aftermath of a disaster, is information that can keep them safe, that can help them understand what's going on. Should I stay? Should I go? Is anybody coming to help me? Where are my family? And how should I act? So the News That Moves is the latest, really. We call it news you can use. That is generally the kind of information that we provide in crisis situations. And we would generally do that by working with local media in the affected country. So for instance, Haitian journalists whose radio stations may, for instance, have been destroyed, we would go in there, we would create a team of them, we would support them to produce the news that people are needing at that time. In refugee camps, we might set up a small radio station. We might have refugees working on that radio station to provide refugees in that camp with news and information about humanitarian services. So it was an incredible challenge to design a project that could provide this rolling flood of people with all of the information that they were going to need in multiple locations simultaneously every day along that route. And so for that reason, we needed to design something that would provide both online information for those refugees who had access to mobile phones or the internet, and offline information, which is essentially face-to-face information, audio, leaflets, pamphlets, notice boards that could be made available physically to refugees at all of the locations along the route. So News That Moves is the virtual bulletin. It's a daily rolling bulletin of updates of all matters of concern to refugees. And it can be downloaded and printed off for physical distribution to refugees in camps. And it can also be used as a basis for audio messages to be broadcast in situations where people are collected in any given place.
Now, Alison, can you talk to me a little bit more about the specific challenges for the migrant crisis that you've been dealing with?
The greatest challenge really is that the situation changed every single day. So in the usual course of events, even post an earthquake or in a refugee camp, you have a relatively stable population and you have a relatively stable set of issues to address every day as you move further away from the onset of the crisis. But in this particular situation, every day was a new crisis, and the crisis was affecting people differently at different locations along the route. So simply keeping up with the volume of information and the constant change, that's the news gathering part of it, was challenging. And getting it out on the ground to refugees was also extremely challenging. Understanding how to reach them in the online space and in the offline space All of these have been quite significant challenges.
Can you tell us a little bit about the role technology has played in the migrant crisis? I understand that you've been implementing an app that releases information, that virtual bulletin board you're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about the role technology has played?
I think one of the interesting things about this crisis was for the people who were watching their televisions last summer when we saw people pouring across Europe, there was quite a big focus in the media on how connected these refugees were. There was a lot of attention paid to the fact that most of them seem to have mobile phones, for instance. And obviously these days in emergency response, SMS and mobile phone technology can give people like ourselves and humanitarian agencies more access to reach people. But actually when we went to the beaches of Lesvos in Greece, where these people were arriving, we realized that they were not using those mobile phones to actually access reliable information. They were using them mainly to talk to their relatives and friends who were perhaps ahead of them on the journey or were perhaps in destination countries. And that information was not necessarily reliable for them because the daily situation was changing so constantly. What one guy is telling you in Germany because he did the journey a month ago is not necessarily going to be helpful to you. There were also a lot of people coming off those boats who had absolutely no idea where they were. They didn't really know the layout of Europe. They didn't have maps. They didn't have mobile phones, and they didn't have reliable information sources. So in that sense, there was actually an enormous reliance on rumor and misinformation. So the grapevine of people talking face-to-face along the route, and then also keeping in touch up and down the route through social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, became a kind of glut of unreliable information that people were being subject to. That means they can't make good decisions. It means they don't necessarily really know what's going on. And so rumor and information, technology can actually kind of put a fire under rumor and misinformation. And this is one of the things which InterNews and also humanitarian agencies have to deal with every day. It's like, how do we make sure that the correct information is reaching enough people to counter this kind of constantly churning grapevine of inaccurate information that is making people vulnerable to threats like smugglers, and just generally making bad decisions about their travel along the route.
So then how do you ensure and maintain accuracy when there are so many rumors flying around, so much misinformation being spread amongst refugees themselves? How do you maintain those standards of accuracy?
Yeah, it's really important that our information is verified. And it's also equally important that we don't just assume that we know what information refugees are receiving or believing, and that we don't know the answers to everything. So our really pretty small news team has to work extremely hard to understand what refugees themselves are thinking, and then we do a lot of verification. I mean, we use the stringers on the ground in the various countries to have them call up local authorities, to have them talk to aid agencies, to understand better what was really going on. But primarily, we talk to refugees on the ground every day. So our offline team, our on-the-ground team, is roaming around, for instance, on Lesvos, gathering information from refugees so that we can understand what the most prevalent rumors are going around in that week. So we speak to 10 different people. We start to hear very similar stories of people are misunderstanding or they've got the wrong end of the stick. Then we understand that that is a prevailing rumor, and we go and we check it out. We call whoever the relevant authorities are, whether it's the Port Authority or a mayor or UNHCR or whoever it is. And then we compile the sort of top trending rumors of the week in a newsletter with the correct information next to it. Also, we want to attribute a source to that correct information so that people understand it's not just us saying this, but we have actually gone and done the due diligence of verification. And we would preferably provide a link or a phone number or some other source where refugees might then be able to go themselves to find out more information about that particular issue.
Thank you, Alison, so much for joining us today. That was Alison Campbell, Senior Director of Global Initiatives at InterNews. She joined us by Skype from Washington.
Thank you.